Well, let's now bring in a great friend of this program, editor-at-large at the Wall Street Journal, Gerard Baker. Gerard, thank you so much for coming here on the U.S. Report tonight. I want to talk to you about a piece you wrote a couple of weeks ago, actually, first of all, and it was about the changing of the guard in the United States, how you had an old oligarchy that wasn't really working, and we see a new oligarchy on the stage at the inauguration and on all the events. 2 weeks in, how do you think this new regime is going?
Well, thanks, James. Thanks for mentioning the column too. Look, I was having a little bit of fun with the idea that the United States is now being run by an oligarchy. There was a lot of bleating and complaining from the usual suspects in the media when we saw Trump's inauguration a couple of weeks ago. All those tech bros up there on the stage with him, the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks, of course, most obviously, but others too. And this alarm supposedly going up that, oh my goodness, we have these incredibly powerful business leaders who control these trillion-dollar companies who are hand in glove now with Donald Trump. What a terrible and unprecedented state of affairs that is. Well, those same people, in many cases, and certainly those companies, have been hand in glove with Democrats for much longer than they have been with Donald Trump. They've been, as you well know, running interference for Democrats for years, blocking material that they think is unhelpful to Joe Biden, doing Joe Biden's bidding. They tend to be staffed by people who worked in Democratic administration. So if I think, as we have seen, these oligarchs have now kind of done a 180 degrees and have now decided that actually all the things that Donald Trump stands for, which is ending diversity and equity and inclusion madness, ending so much of this radical left-wing stuff that these companies have themselves been promoting for so long, then bring it on. Let's have an oligarchy that actually works in the interests of the American people and not against them.
Well, and it occurs to me, Gerard, that one of the things we also talked about a lot during the Biden administration was how back in those days it seemed like this kind of Brezhnev-era Soviet Union gerontocracy that was running the place. And now we see a much sort of more young and dynamic cabinet coming in. Many of these people are in their 40s, 50s, young people like J.D. Vance, relatively younger people like J.D. Vance, with their young families. Is there just a broader sense of youthfulness about this administration, even if Donald Trump himself is pushing 80?
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? Donald Trump actually was the oldest president in November, the oldest man ever to be elected president of the United States, because he was actually older than Joe Biden was in 2020. So he is, he's not quite there yet at Joe Biden's age, but he will be if he gets, presuming he gets through this term. And yet, as you say, there's more important. There's an energy and a dynamism about this administration. You don't have to like all of it. I write independently. I don't praise everything they do. I don't like some of the things they do. I didn't, for example, like Donald Trump's attempt to use tariffs this week to get Mexico and Canada apparently to do absolutely nothing. So I'm not always a fan of what Donald Trump does, but there's absolutely no denying his first 2.5 weeks have been the most astonishing blizzard of activity, much of it desirable. You've talked about immigration there in your remarks just a minute ago, and finally moving to remove some of the many illegal immigrants in this country. Again, abolishing DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs throughout the federal government, getting Elon Musk to do his extraordinary Doge exercise and exposing all kinds of, frankly, dubious and abusive spending practices in the federal government. He's really, he's moving. I mean, and again, some of it, maybe he moves a bit too fast, like promising to take over, for the United States going to take over Gaza. But there's an energy and a dynamism, particularly in rolling back this is the key, James, and you've talked a lot about this on your show over the years, rolling back this takeover of the institutions of this country, and I'm sorry to say it's the same in Australia and in England, where I come from, by this progressive left elite that have injected their ideological viewpoint into it, have turned these institutions, frankly, into sort of cultural bastions in which they can promote these ideas that are fundamentally inimical to free speech and inimical to the values on which this country was built. And I think, whatever else I may think about what Donald Trump's doing, I think that program, that effort, that energy that he's bringing to roll that back is very welcome.
And, I spent an awful lot of time in the U.S. last year, and after that election, I just felt like there was that energy in the air. But so many of the things they do just seems like, I mean, common sense is an overused phrase, but for example, Pam Bondi, who's the new Attorney General, just confirmed, well, one of the first things that she's announced is that they're going to cut federal funding to sanctuary cities that refuse to deal with federal immigration authorities. I mean, this seems like such basic stuff that we weren't able to do for years in the United States. What do you make of that?
Absolutely. The sanctuary city situation that we've had, where, I'm sure as your viewers know, these cities actually essentially refuse to cooperate with the federal government in identifying and dealing with the massive numbers of illegal immigrants. I live in New York City. It's supposedly a sanctuary city. Especially in the last 4 years, we've had a huge influx of illegal migrants into the city, and we've had increases in crime, and we've had them very, very hard, a lot of pressure on housing here and on health services and all these other things. And yet, as a sanctuary city, New York refuses to do anything about it. Well, in comes Pam Bondi, the new Attorney General, and says, "Sorry, we're not going to let you do that anymore." So there will be, as you say, common sense. There will be. Look, the number of illegal migrants in this country is completely out of control. We probably had 10 million in the last 4 years, maybe more, on top of millions who existed who were here before that. Look, many of them, and I think these will be. I think we need to be a little careful about sort of branding them all. There are a lot of people here who've lived here for a very long time. Children were born here, and who are contributing to the US. And maybe a way can be found to keep those there. But there are large numbers of criminals, James. There's large numbers of people, violent criminals. There's large numbers of people who are scofflaws. There's large numbers of people who, frankly, are living off the state and living off the various benefits that they get in some of these cities. It's only right, in the interest of American voters and taxpayers, that those people should be dealt with.